This is all good information. Yeah, whoa. So for those of you who don't know, this is Jonathan Kreisberg, guitarist from New York City. He has his own trio. You guys play what, every Wednesday night, Parks?
Oh, I got all kinds of bands.
Yeah.
Just some funny things that happen.
Okay. Yeah. But he also performs with Dr. Lonnie Smith. In fact, you were just over in London with him, right?
Yeah.
He's here to share knowledge with us. I want to mention that part of this clinic is funded by UW, but also the Greater Madison Jazz Consortium. If you got some flyers from Howard over here to see what else is going on with the sponsor. Tonight, we're playing at the Brink Lounge starting at 9 o'clock. So you can come over and check it out. Won't be worth every game, but it'll be worth every game. So without, we'll let him finish composing what he's composing. Jonathan, Chris, warm it up.
That's a beautiful classic tune called Stardust. Amazing song. That was the pop song of yesterday. That song was, you know, there's something your grandmas may have read called Reader's Digest. They had like a best song in America competition, and you know, this was, back then it wasn't just grandmas, everyone read that. And I think it was like 15 years in a row, it was the most popular song in America. Pretty amazing, right? How long was Poker Face at number one? A couple weeks, maybe a couple days, yeah. Well, I think there's a reason for that. You know, a song like that, this has so many nooks and crannies, melodically and harmonically. Even if you're not a musician, you can listen to that a million times and still hear something new. It's pretty amazing. So that's, I mean, that's a big reason why we play standards, because there's just so much more to deal with. You know, it's fun to, like, you know, reinvent a pop tune and kind of turn it into a jazz thing, you know, a modern pop tune. But you have to kind of do things to it. You know, these tunes, you just play it with no feeling at all whatsoever if you can, and it's still going to sound amazing. It's just a piece of music. This goes back to when, you know, the composers of American popular music were actually trained, you know, in the art of composition. They were all trying to one-up each other. You know, that's why you get Cole Porter being like, "What did Hoagie just do on that thing?" Start seeing if he can come up with something hipper. You know what I mean? And they were doing that, battling it out on the airwaves, and you know, that's why we have these thousands of tunes that you guys can draw from to learn about, you know, melodic structure and relationship of harmony and melody, and you know, never even go beyond that, and you're kind of fine. I've had people ask me before, like, if I can only do one thing, what should I do? And that's always my answer, just learn standards. If you can only do one thing, it's all there. You know? Every standard is like an amazing solo, you know what I mean? At whatever tempo, you can play it slow, it sounds beautiful. If you can speed it up really fast, it would actually sound like an amazing solo, you know? Because it's just a collection of harmony and its relationship to melody, you know? So, those of you that know my music, you know that I compose some pretty modern stuff, but that being said, I always, when I'm teaching, I always make a point of letting people know that, like, I come from that, you know, that's a big thing. If I couldn't do what I did if I hadn't learned 300 tunes by the time I was 20, you know, and had them memorized and playing different keys, you know, and that does something to your brain. So, any questions about what I just played, or any of my records, or life on the road, windsurfing, internet dating, whatever?
It's like to play with Rocky.
Oh, that's great. I mean, Lonnie is like, we're like somehow connected. You know, like when we first played, it was like there was a moment where he was like, "What's this guy doing?" You know, and he's played with some amazing guitar players. I mean, Lonnie's played with George Benson, Kim Bernstein, those are guys that he's associated with. So when I played, the first time I played, I think I tried to kind of be like P. Bernstein. You know what I mean? Like just thinking that's what he wanted. You know? And that gig was not that great. We had to screw it up on that gig as well. And some time passed after that. And then the second time I got a call to fill in, you know, on his gig, I said, you know what, this time I'm going to play the way I play, you know what I mean? Which is, you know, complete with some different, you know, kind of ways of looking at harmony and melody, and I used some sounds and stuff. And on that gig, then he was more like looking at me. I didn't know what that look was. You know, it was kind of like either he wants to kill me, or you know, or he's wondering what's going on. You know. But then I started getting more calls, and I realized that, like, you know, he was kind of looking to stretch a little bit. So I think in a way I was kind of an agent for that, because I brought a lot of different stuff to that band. You know, I mean, I played jazz and I've studied a lot of bebop, but I also can play like funk, and I can play rock, and I use a lot of modern New York harmony and stuff like that. And I just realized that that's kind of Lonnie, actually. He's very rooted to the blues and to jazz tradition. Not necessarily bebop, maybe a little more like the jazz, like soul jazz. That's where he's coming from, you know what I mean? But beyond that, he's really like, he likes this idea that jazz is a place where anything can happen. You know what I mean? So in that way, me and him are really similar. You know what I mean? So even though our backgrounds are really different, over the years we just like we read each other's mind on stage. You know what I mean? So it's a really unique experience, because you know, I've had relationships like that with musicians with similar backgrounds. So of course, you know, we hear a certain harmony or a certain groove, and we kind of know where it's going because we have a lot of references. But Lonnie and I don't actually share that, but we share the spirit. You know what I mean? So it's more like he'll do something that I'm like, oh man, that's deep. I don't even know what that is, but I'm gonna figure that out. And then I'll do something like that where he does that. So it's like, it's always, you know, this really interesting connection of two different worlds that are somehow really connected. You know? I also say that's why, like, to do my bands and then to play with Lonnie is like a very complete, like, you know, it's like it covers everything. You know, I love playing with other people too, but really with those two things, I'm fine. I'm okay. You know what I mean? Yeah. And beyond that, it's, you know, it's one thing that I try and learn from him that's pretty unique is someone to have such a strong personality, because he's very strong personality. You know? But at the same time, there's like an openness for the musicians in the band, if that makes sense. So like he's able to be really strong and have a unique sound and universe, but then in that you can really be yourself. You don't have to kind of, you know, change what you do necessarily. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Is that a good answer? You guys are gonna find there'll be probably time for one more question. Because the answer is way long.
So, did your playing change completely once the freestyle came out?
Oh,
It seems like
you know,
you're using it.
yeah, well, it's funny. Actually, actually, the truth is, when I was probably about your age, when I was, just out of college, I was probably 21 or something like that, I actually developed an idea that was very similar to this. And it was using an infinite reverb that you could kind of click in, so to speak. And I sent it off to a couple like companies, but they never did anything. I sent it to Boss. Back then there wasn't many pedal companies. And I said, like, you need to do this. I've always had what I call pianist envy because I love piano and I want to sound like a pianist. That didn't get as much laughs. The lyric did. But I always wanted that sound where the left hand holds out. You know what I mean? So yeah, as soon as that finally came out, I freaked out and I got one and I kind of modified it a little bit, and I still have a couple things I want to maybe try with it. But yeah, especially if I'm playing in this setting, although you have to be really careful about it. Like, I don't like to draw too much attention to it sonically. I like it to be like very subtle. Today I had it set a little higher than I usually do. Usually I do it's almost like a controlled reverb, creating a little ambience. But I'm still fine to not use it. I mean, sometimes I forget it's there and I don't use it for a while. But in the morning when I haven't warmed up and I'm playing standard in front of judgmental students, it's there. No, but basically, it creates another element to the music where it's kind of an element that to me should have always been there. Like, piano players have that. Why don't we? You know what I mean? That kind of feeling. But like I said, if it's overused, it still sounds a little gimmicky. So you have to really be careful about how you set it up. You know what I mean? Yeah, but it's a great invention. I mean, for me, pedals are all that. They're all just ways of achieving something. You know what I mean? It's not like about the pedal. Some guys I can see it's more about the actual pedal. For me, it's not. It's about whatever you achieve with it. And on that subject, there's a really interesting thing that I noticed once. I got this book that was all these stories from older jazz musicians, like in the 30s and 40s, perspectives in jazz or something. Even 20s, I think. It's really interesting. And I was thinking about this. I read this one article, and it just completely reminded me of like someone like Winton or someone who's like more traditionalist now, like talking about like guitar sounds and making a joke about pedals or something. You know what I mean? And it was hilarious because this article was exactly, if you took out the word mute and you switched it with guitar pedals, it would have been the same article. and ironically, those traditionalist guys all playing big bands where they used like plungers and stuff like that. But at the time, those were guitar pedals. That's exactly what they were. They were, oh, there's this thing I can put on my instrument that changes the sound, and like, you know what I mean? And so there was actually guys in this article talking about mutes, like, oh, real musicians don't need to use those. It's like a technology, So I thought that was really, really interesting to read that, you know what I mean? And then it made me think a little more about the pedals, because I've always thought about them. There was a time when I moved to New York at first where I put them all away, because when I was in Miami, I had a band where it was very much like sonically experimental, And I think it's good to put them away sometimes and really just deal with your hands, But that article was really interesting, put things in perspective. Let me just give you on.
Sorry, just as somebody who like the only pedals I use are the ones that come attached to the piano.
Right. Exactly.
Can you just demonstrate?
But you have those.
Oh yeah, no. It's cool. Can you just demonstrate that for a moment?
The thing I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a sustain. It's just so the guitar normally, if I want to sustain something, I have to do it with my hands. I don't know why my sound sounds kind of funny. I think it might be this chord or something. Yeah, wow. Just changed a lot, didn't it? So normally I would play this, right? And what if I heard like, I can't play it. You know what I mean? The only thing I could do is I could kind of do that or something. I'd be like Stanley Jordan, which is cool, but it's a little like, but now I can go, you see? And usually it doesn't go, usually, sorry. Right? So it opens up a lot I haven't actually recorded, but actually I did. I used it on my last record, but I used it really subtle. Like, I haven't done like a solo album or a trio album where it's really obvious that I'm using it. You know what I mean? Because I've said it, so it's not too obvious. I have heard myself on live recordings where sometimes it sounds really obvious. Like it sounds like a second guitar player jumped in and was like, and that can be weird. You know what I mean? So you have to really make it sound like it's one with what you're doing, so to speak. You know?
That's really cool. It actually reminds me less of the left hand on the piano and organ because
it's more like
because there's no decay.
It is a lot like an organ. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing I would maybe think about changing. Actually, like that's one of the things I'm kind of curious about. Maybe it would be nice to have a setting where you could lengthen it, but then it would decay also. You know, so it would change a little over time. So it wouldn't just be like B. You know. But then again, the organ's pretty cool too. So, and I don't have it here, but I have another pedal that sometimes I combine with that, and it really sounds like an organ. I didn't need that for Eric's record, so I left it in New York. Jettisoned. But yeah.
Yeah, when you did the standard, Stardust, you all kinds of different harmonies, and then you used this term New York style harmony.
Did I say that?
Yeah, you did.
Horrible.
For us guys, it'd be nice to know what that is.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm like, I say horrible that I said that.
I mean, you did all kinds of interesting reharmonization.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, I mean, I guess one of the things about what I would call a modern New York harmony is just that there's definitely a vibe there where guys realize that there's a distinctive language in the realm of harmony. You know, that each person can actually have their own language harmonically. You know what I mean? Which seems to be maybe not everywhere. In some places, it's like, well, you get your drop threes and you know what I mean? But I think something that I hear in the young modern guys, you know, is kind of a dedication to kind of having their own language.
It's not like they're trying to sell it to San Francisco or something.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. San Francisco.
Well, I mean, we got like a classical people like Stravinsky and Bartok, they have radically different ways in which
Definitely, exactly.
the same triad in place.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, part of it's listening to that stuff. I mean, I listen a lot to, you know, Hindemith and like Copeland. You know, I like those kind of sounds. I mean, when I first heard Appalachian Spring, that part where he does like, you know, he does that sound.
Ding, ding.
That was C sharp, right? Yeah, that sound. When I heard that, I was like probably a kid when I heard that, but I immediately recognized like, wow, like just the harmonic color just completely did something to me.
I did that the first time I looked at Mary Lou Williams' big band church. Smashes everything and puts the seconds down on the bottom.
Wow.
So you get this like grinding.
Mary Lou Williams.
Mary Lou Williams, yeah, and
Wow,
it's stunning.
that was
It's like
really
totally upside down from what we've been taught.
Yeah.
And you realize when you listen to her charts, it's got this kind of
Crunch.
driving crunch. And
Yeah.
that's how she's getting it.
What year was she doing that?
30s, mid-30s.
What?
36.
I gotta go. I got to check that out actually. I don't actually know her arrangements.
Yeah,
I
no,
just know her as a piano player. Yeah. Wow. Is there like a
There's
specific?
one. I've got a chart. I can't remember the tune. It's on this. It's like the Smithsonian famous jazz stuff, and it's
Right. The big brown, black and yellow.
yeah,
box?
something, and it's on that first
Actually
CD,
have that.
1935.
I should know that.
Yeah, but when you listen to it, you just feel it's like punchiness.
Yeah.
It's just playing the same chords, just all
Right.
sevenths and ninths.
And she probably took it from something she was doing
Yeah.
on piano. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can trace the seconds, and they're all going down. On the
Yeah.
bottom.
Well, that's why because it's like a modern thing to do that.
Yeah,
Something like
exactly.
that. Yeah. Then the piano players double it a lot. Like that's the what do you call it?
Yeah, I heard that.
It's a doubled, and then in the middle you got the second. Yeah. That's piano stuff. Like guitar players, it's actually really hard to do
On
that on guitar, but I try to. Yeah, that's a sound.
try to bass.
Oh yeah, bass is even harder. Okay, we're rolling now.
Since you're kind of,
Are you allowed to ask questions?
I'm going to. Since kind of on this talk about harmony, maybe you could talk a little bit about the tune that we worked on together and how one thing flowed from the other. I mean, you reharmonized a little bit of the thing, or changed some harmonies of things
Yeah.
that I had originally written, and then you wrote the bridge and talk about how that process works for you a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard. For me, composing is hard to talk about. It's
Agreed.
very hard to talk about because I almost like it's like a weird thing where I don't want to codify it. You know what I mean? Because somehow codifying it might limit the possibilities. So when it comes, I mean, I study a lot of harmony and I practice a lot of voicings and different ways of leading, and there's some technical, approaches to it. But when it comes to actually sitting down and being like, what's going on here? It's not really intellectual usually. It's more like, what do I hear? And then I hopefully hear something, and then I figure out what I'm hearing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's usually my ear leading it. Your tune in particular, he had a tune that was kind of swinging, but it had like a little modern thing to it. I think with that tune, I just kind of helped to kind of realize what you were going for as far as
Coming away from hard bop and going.
well, that's
into-
a very that's for a lot of guys that's a weird, and I've seen some guys that they really it's hard to get past that. You know what I mean? Like this. For me, I mean, my background is so weird. Like I grew up. My dad had like Miles and Train records and Wes and Beatles and Cream and Hendrix and John Williams playing the Aranjuez. All this kind of really different things. But then I started playing guitar and I started getting into like rock, and I also got into like progressive rock and Alan Holdsworth. So I got really into that sound. And then the first record that really got me into jazz, like again, like having heard it as a kid and liking it, I remember hearing Kind of Blue and I always enjoyed it, But then I heard Nefertiti, that record, and I was like, oh yeah, that's something so expansive in the sound of that record, like anything can happen, And that, for me, was what actually attracted me to jazz. Whereas a lot of guitar players grow up and they hear Wes and they go, oh yeah, that's my sound, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I of course recognize and love Wes, but I didn't come to jazz that way, you know what I mean? I kind of came that way backwards, So for me, that line between hard bop and modern is different for someone like you, you know what I mean? Someone who grows up and like they really start studying Lee Morgan and coming out of that thing, it's almost hard to break away from those harmonies, you know what I mean? So when they do, sometimes it feels a little uncomfortable, which is what I said. I said, oh, it sounds like you're kind of trying to get into modern, but it's a clear point where it's like this is hard bop, and now suddenly it's like, where did this come from? You know what I mean? So for me, I don't know. Somehow, having looked at that from a different angle, I kind of seem to. I just know way to say this without being like, because I'm really cool. It's not what I mean. It's just that I don't. I can see very clearly when something's functional and when something's another kind of harmony.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I hear it all. There's ways you can mix it, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So that's what we did on your tune. I mean, we kind of went back and made it still kind of functional, but like trippy functional. You know what I mean?
Well, even on the bridge, you kind of took that same sort of descending idea
Right.
that I had, and it worked
Well,
out.
you had all those two. He had a descending. They don't know these tunes, so
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But he had a lot of descending 2/5s. You know what I mean? And like to me, as soon as you do that, boom, like you're in a certain era. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we took that out and we went for a different thing. Even something like like the bridge now, which is like it's.
Well, the bridge to me looks like tritone sub root, or tritone sub 1, tritone sub 1. But
In
but
a
again,
way,
that's how I look at it. I'm not
It
sure.
is, but it's creating a softer line between the modern stuff and the bebop. Yeah.
Do you ever find so if you're mixing two styles, I guess, if you come from a background listening to a lot of rock per se, and then you kind of trying to blend jazz and maybe rock, and you get in that middle area, does it ever feel like it lacks what you could have in one or the other? I guess an analogy would be like if you're mixing colors, you have like a bright color and another bright color, you mix them together, you get like brown.
No, I mean that's a great question. You gain something. You know what I mean? You lose something, of course. If you play, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys know my records. Anyone know my music, like South of Everywhere or something like that? Damn, guys.
These are Spotify people, man.
What'd you say?
These are Spotify people. They don't pay for records.
Well, sadly to say that it is on Spotify because that's Mel Bay and they put all the stuff on Spotify. So go home on Spotify and listen to it. But no, I mean, like, that's a tune of mine that's clearly jazz and rock. You know what I mean? It's not fusion, but it's a combination of elements from both of those kinds of music. And on that tune, it's like, yeah, if I had like played through a Marshall and like simplified the harmony, it would be more nasty, for sure. And if I got rid of like the kind of like the driving rock drum feel on that tune, it would maybe be more nuanced or more swinging or something like that. You know what I mean? So I mean, to start to get obsessed with those subjects is kind of stupid. You know what I mean? Like, it's its own thing and it's really good what it is. You know what I mean? It's really good. You got it. But you know, it's something that necessarily wouldn't have necessarily happened if it wasn't someone who had experience playing both those kinds of music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the key. I hear a lot of jazz guys that don't really know how to play rock, so it sounds kind of wussy when they play it. And then there's guys that are like rock guys that like they think they're being sophisticated and they put some chords, but like we hear it, we're like, that's good, man. You know what I mean? So it's like knowing a little about both is kind of important, you know. Although it's actually, yeah, I mean, I would argue it's almost easier to introduce some different harmony into a rock tune than it is to learn to play a jazz guy and make something sound convincingly powerful in a rock way. You know what I mean? So yeah, do some research and really play some different kinds of music at this age, because at one point you'll need to make a choice and really go that way. You know, that's what I did. I mean, when I grew up in Miami, I did all these really weird gigs. I think one week I would have like a gig playing bebop, and then I would play the next day with the Backstreet Boys, and then I would play a gig with a hard rock, progressive rock band, you know what I mean? And then I would play like a funk gig, you know what I mean? And then I'd go back and do a gig with a jazz singer, you know? Then I moved to New York, and suddenly it was like, oh, there's like 100 guys that are like the best jazz players in the world, and there's 100 guys that are like the best funk guitar players in the world. There's 100 guys that are, you know what I mean? Everyone's very specialized. So at that point, it forced me to say, okay, well, what am I going to do? You know what I mean? Even if it wasn't literally that decision, it happened. You know what I mean? But there's something to be said about listening to different kinds of music and researching and maybe even trying stuff. If I hadn't done that, I couldn't write the stuff I do, and I couldn't play with Lonnie the way we play now, because it really can change directions really quickly. You know, from like on a misty night, like super quiet, into like some psychedelic gospel fusion freak out. You know what I mean? So that's to be able to do that convincingly takes research and it takes love for the different kinds of music. It's not just like, well, I want to add this because it'll be clever. You know, I was at my first concert was the Police Synchronicity tour. That was ridiculous. Stuart Copeland, amazing. You know. So at the same time I was transcribing Bird. So you know what I mean. I love different kinds of music, and that hopefully comes through. You know, it's not a gimmick. You know what I mean. So I wouldn't worry about it unless you start to worry about it a lot. Unless you're like, wow, my music is really not rocking. You know what I mean? And then you realize, oh well, maybe I want to join a rock band, and that's cool. Do that. You know, you got to be true to what you want to do. You know, for me, it was never sophisticated enough just to be in a rock band, and it was never dynamically interesting enough for me. It was too loud all the time. You know what I mean? Like that's only one aspect of my personality. Part of being a great jazz musician is like embracing the many-faceted sophistication of your personality. You know what I mean? That has to, that you have to greet that and be like, that's cool. You know, not trying to be in rock. You're kind of poo-pooed on for that. You know? Thinking too much, man. Feel it. You know, fuck that. You know, I want to think about stuff. I like that. You know what I mean? So that's part of a jazz personality. There's a certain personality that comes with being a good jazz musician. That was a pretty long answer. Did I cover it?
Yeah.
So I kind of think of like
searching. Bill Frisell, Abathini, Schofield, Alan Holdsworth, those guys were really like looking for a new way of getting sound out of guitar, you know. I mean, Kurt's great, but I wouldn't put him with those guys as far as shaping modern jazz guitars, you know. But what was the question?
Well, just kind of, I feel like there's a switch from, like, bebop guitar playing is like, you have a really, like, sharp attack and you're not sustaining notes.
Right.
Kind of where, like, you're at, where it's like, okay, let's add a lot of reverb, let's add delay, and let's kind of, like, take away maybe,
And
like,
some weird mushy tube sounds.
like, take away kind of, like, the natural guitar, like, very short sustained notes to go into this kind of, like, very sustained.
Yeah. Well, that's part. Yeah, try and get the guitar to sing. You know what I mean? Sorry, just sometimes. Yeah, I think it's like goes back to the same thing I said about composing. It's like hearing something in your head that you want to achieve, and then finding a way to get there. You know what I mean? And for me, you know, like I said, like I love jazz, but actually the records that drew me to jazz were not guitar records. Eventually they were. Matheny, you know, and Schofield were big influences for me. And Alan Holdsworth. Actually, my first record is like, pretty different from how I play now, sound-wise. For me, Holdsworth is really like a unique character who's as deep as any jazz musician. You know what I mean? He is a jazz musician, but he's on his own terms. You know, very unique player. So I mean, having played that kind of stuff and grown up listening to that, I'm naturally going to try and put that together into my own way. You know what I mean? And that's the same thing that Kurt did. I mean, we actually have pretty similar influences, which is, you know, probably the reason why we both have a certain sound or whatever. You know, our two favorite guitar players are Holdsworth and Matheny. You know what I mean? So that's going to happen if you kind of combine those sounds. You know what I mean? But in time, I almost appreciate Schofield more and more. Because Schofield of those guys really has the most of a jazz personality, you know, just in the moment, and it's whatever happens, and it's just, you know, something about that I admire that I wish I had more of, you know. But no, it's just about hearing a sound and wanting to achieve a certain sound, you know what I mean? So that's what those come from, and also just the way I play. I mean, if I play a Gibson L5 and a straight ahead guy right next to me plays a Gibson L5, we're going to sound really different. You know, just in the way we attack and the way we sustain and stuff like that. I mean, I do think just to sustain notes that a straight ahead guy wouldn't do, because like you said, maybe he's going for that more percussive, shorter thing. You know what I mean? So even just the way I might, you know, play a note, you know, maybe I play, and I might do some little thing to sustain it. I may even switch my finger, you know what I mean? I just left my volume though, because that's another trick. You know, but I might do something like, say I play this note, and I want to play this chord, right? So I may actually go, see what I did? I held that and switched the finger, so that it can sing on top of the chord, you know what I mean? You won't see a straight ahead old school guy do that, because it wouldn't be something they would think of necessarily, you know what I mean? But they do things I can't do. You know what I mean? Again, it's not about, of course, you're going to lose something. Every time you gain something, you're going to lose something. But it's choices. It's like thousands of little choices about value. You know, that's what creates a style.
What kind of response do you get from bass players for that? Because I'm thinking about playing with a bebop player.
It's
There's no keyboard player. Suddenly the bass player is
the bass player is like, not that changed.
Yeah,
No response.
the bass player has to change it all up different ways when you're playing against a guy that's not playing any hum.
Right.
As opposed to what you're doing with suddenly with huge freedom, okay? Or a different kind of.
Yeah. No, I think, well, one thing I'll say is like, it would depend on the situation, but like in my band, I'm pretty specific about, like say, like if we're playing a standard, about which set of changes I'd like to play, you know what I mean? Some bass players are used to like, they'll just put subs all over the place and stuff like that, and for me it's like, the the same way with any comping instrument, not just bass. I mean, I consider bass a comping instrument. I mean, you know, so I guess like when I was a kid, I remember hearing certain records, like maybe it was like Billie Holiday or something, where like no one really talked about the changes, and you hear the piano player do something, and then like, you know, or those like 70s or 80s session records, and you hear like these funny little, like the bass player's playing tritone subs and the other guy's doing something, and I hear that and just be like, I hear that, like don't people hear that? Some people don't care as much, but when I hear something like Coltrane's sound, that's clearly like a band, and they know which change is the basis, and then they can change it beyond that, but it's, everyone knows this is the chord, you know what I mean?
But I think that's, maybe I'm not getting the question of chord, like think like Bach. When
Right.
Bach, most of his harmonies imply because you have a contrapuntal.
Oh yeah, no, and I was going to get to that.
If I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
walk arpeggios against trying to fill in the chords when they're not there, it doesn't work. If I start walking
Right.
melodic lines against your melodic lines, all of a sudden the harmony kind of falls in place.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
if I play like that against your comp, it doesn't work anymore.
The contrapuntal thing, you mean?
Yeah, start walking.
Well, yeah, like for instance, like, so the first thing was one subject I was talking about. That's a separate subject, which yeah, I
I
definitely.
mean, I shouldn't say it wouldn't work, but
It depends how good the ears are, you know what I mean? It can work really good. That being said, like sometimes I'll play a ballad, and like if I play a ballad, I might play a counter line, you know what I mean? I might play,
you're doing lots of those experiments.
yeah, exactly. Although I wouldn't do that probably, I wouldn't play it. You know, for me, that's one thing that what my students I'm always talking about is like, look at the situation you're in and really think about it differently, you know, feel it differently. Because if you're playing solo, it's completely different than playing, I mean, I could list every setting is completely different. To me, it's a huge difference just adding one person to a band. I mean, playing guitar trio versus trio piano is completely different, changes my role 100%. Whereas horn players, it doesn't really change that much. You play in a duo, then he plays in a trio, it's not really changing. Guitar, your role changes a lot. So playing solo, I'm being a bass player. I mean, you know, that's part of what I'm doing. Playing duo with a bass, now I'm not. Playing duo with a horn, I still am. You know what I mean? Playing in a trio with bass is completely different than playing in a trio with organ. You know what I mean? So they're really every setting changes, and that's again tiny little choices. You know, if you're a bass player and you're like, oh, every time this chord comes, I love to do this thing. But meanwhile, depending on the setting, you might not be able to do that thing. You know what I mean? Some guys just do it anyways, and you know, it just.
So that's interesting. I mean, Carl Allen said, you know, you sit and you guys, you get like 2 seconds to figure out who you're going to listen to and you're going to listen to.
Right.
And locking for me, it's always if there's a guitarist in the band, I know it's going to change up everything from what I'm used to doing. I just do this.
Yeah, and that also depends on the guitar player, because like there's so many different kinds of guitar players. You know what I mean? Some guys really don't know much about harmony, and they're kind of clunky or something, and that's you got to watch out for that. You know, and then other ones really are advanced with some of that stuff, and you got to kind of watch out for that. You know what I mean? Like yeah, I was going to say the example I was going to use.
Anybody too, you get one players who don't know harmony. Some that do.
Yeah, hopefully.
Oh.
Yeah. But you know, if I'm playing even like a ballad, if I play like right something like that, like even those little things. I might do something like. I might be doing that kind of thing, which, right, if I do those little lines, it's going to change what the bass player is. You know what I mean? So if the bass player is used to being like Eddie Gomez and getting up there and everything, it's just going to be a mess, you know? So for something like that, I would kind of want him to just,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Something
Well, that
like
was
that.
a little implication about a little freedom because, you know, as a bass player, if you're walking chords all the time, you never get a break. You're just constant 100% start to end.
Yeah.
Playing against that, you got a little time to just say,
No, it's one thing I noticed about the bass players that I like. They can play so much stuff, but a lot of those guys, they're really about placement and really simple stuff. You know what I mean? Like I can tell the difference between those guys right away because they're so focused on where they're putting things. You know what I mean? That's a great quality for me. Like just great sound, intonation, like really time and really thinking about when they're playing up beats, when they're playing down beats, where they're putting stuff. You know, that those things make such a difference. Makes the whole band sound better. You know.
What you're just talking about is, you know, communication and musical conversation, and that's something that's obviously incredibly at the center of you know, everything that you do. And I'm wondering if you could maybe talk about making a solo album and how that conversation with the other players, what takes the place of that, how you approach that.
Yeah, that's I did a solo album. It's the one before the last, called One, and that was definitely like a different experience, very different experience. But it came out of like realizing that. Like I was touring a lot at the time, and every time I was home, I just, at that period, for some reason, I just found myself like playing tunes solo, and like I would like kind of come up with these kind of concepts on tunes, and then I would play them, and then I'd go on tour again, and I'd come back, and then I'd be like, what was that thing I was doing? That was really cool, you know? And then I'd listen, sometimes I'd record, I don't know if it was on my phone yet, if I had the iPhone yet, but recording on something I listened to, I was like, oh, it's pretty good. Like, it's not like awesome, but it's like, it's kind of interesting, this solo thing, you know? And it was more like a fun thing, you know what I mean? And then it hit me one day, I was like, man, why don't I like push a little harder, and like, this could be like a thing, you know? So I actually bought a couple nice mics, and I started recording in my house, you know, when I was back on these tours. And then the first couple things I recorded, I just listened to it, I was like, oh, what am I thinking? I don't want to do a solo guitar record, it's so boring, you know what I mean? But I kept pushing through, and you know, had a couple moments where I like, and then I learned that tune, Canto di Asani, and I started recording that, and I got through this one take, and as soon as I hit the last chorus, the take on the record, you can hear I'm like, yeah, that was good, you know? And I listened back to it, and I was like, yeah, now I knew I could do a record. It was like the one tune, you know what I mean? But because solo guitar, I have a lot of respect for. A lot of the guys that do solo guitar, it's a little different than piano. It's probably true in piano to a certain extent with Art Tatum or someone like that, but with guitar, it's really true. Like the guys that get really into solo guitar, that's kind of what they do. You know, they don't really sound so great with bands anymore because of that reason. They get used to being the band. They get used to embodying the movement to the music, and everything comes from them. So then they go to play with a band, and it sounds kind of weird, you know. I don't want to say it, especially because you have a tape running, but there's certain guitar players at certain points in their lives that just did that, and it kind of changed the way they sounded with bands, you know. So I was really conscious of that, and wanted to just take a period, and I did. I took a summer, and I just said, okay, every time I'm home, I'm just playing solo guitar. That's it. And I did some gigs at Smalls and around town playing solo guitar, and I really focused on it. And the way I recorded was kind of cool. It was like, it wasn't overly composed, although there were little sections, and like, you know, on Stardust, some of those little lines I've kind of messed with, you know, the guide tones and like strange contrapuntal things, you know. But there was a lot of looseness. I wanted to keep it, I didn't want it to be, a lot of guitar players compose that stuff, you know. I mean, even guys that can improvise great. I remember seeing Tuck Andrus, who's amazing, he's one of the baddest solo guitar players. But I remember seeing him live and like realizing like in the middle of, I think it was like Europa or Stellar, one of those tunes, like I was like, wow, that's exactly like the record, you know what I mean? And that kind of messed with me a little bit, you know what I mean? I was like, you know, it's really good, and I appreciate that, but it's, for me, I would go crazy if I had to like go on tour playing that, and I had to do that every time, you know? So my approach to that was kind of weird. I didn't prepare like a whole album and go into the studio one day. I actually, each time I was home, I would start playing one of those tunes like all day, like just playing, you know, I thought about you, walking bass and playing lines, you know, trying to do that, you know. And then at the end of the week, I would record it, you know. So it was like, it was improvised, but it was like I lived with it. It wasn't like coming to something fresh. It was like, you know what I mean? And at the end, yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with that record. I don't know if I will do it again anytime soon. Like maybe down the line I will do another solo thing. But for a guitar player, I recognized, speaking of not being scared to think deeply, like I realized like it's a really big difference. It's a huge thing to undertake because you have to imply all this movement and like the band, whether it's walking bass or creating a rhythm, you know. And there's guys that play really good solo guitar that I don't feel that with, like guys that can do all kinds of really complicated stuff, and sometimes I hear that I just don't feel the feeling like So that was important for me. And I took it as a compliment when Downbeat reviewed it, and they said that it was great use of overdubs, because there was no overdub. Right. It was two guitar players at the time. So I thought that was a pretty good, I've achieved something. But it's a different thing. I have great respect for it, and I'd like to get back to it one day, but as soon as I finished that, I wanted to get back to the band and interacting with other musicians. But as far as interacting with myself, I mean, I think I always, because I always did solo gigs. When I first moved to New York, that's how I kind of survived. I would bring a little amp and my guitar, and I'd walk into like a restaurant and they'd be like, "Hey, can I play for you?" And I would just play for an hour or something for free. And I got a lot of little gigs that way, And that was, I was always, even if people were listening or not listening, I have always enjoyed creating a little world that's, and I liked it with solo guitar. You can change key, you can change time signature, you can do all that stuff, you don't have to warn anybody, you know what I mean? So that's cool to me. And people don't embrace that enough either, I think, you know what I mean? We're trying to stick really firmly to a certain form or something. Like, you can really mess with stuff, That Keith intro on Stella by Starlight, for me, was a big thing when I first heard that. I was like, oh, how brilliant. Like, he's playing the tune, but the form and the harmony are actually becoming elements of improvisation, That was really interesting to me, So I started just doing that. I know Stella in every key, so I said, why don't I just see, like, what could happen? And you just realize, like, you can... I've been through 3 keys, right? Stella is probably like 13 keys. But the melody can lead you and let the melody kind of be there, but the harmony and the form is improvising, Why not? I mean, it's just other elements to play with. No one else is playing. I'd say like 75% of those I liked. There was a couple of modulations that were a little questionable. But, you know, in this setting, I was taking some chances. Some of them I just start, if you do it enough, you start to hear it. You know what I mean? You start to hear the modulation. The ones that I didn't like, I didn't hear. They were like intellectual, and then after I was like, you know what I mean? There's something to be said for that. You know, practice it that way, and then the ones that you can hear, do it. You know, I don't know if you guys know. There's a live Keith Jarrett where he does Stella. And it starts with the melody, and then it just splinters out. You can hear he just hears something else, and he goes and it starts like, oh, it's incredible.
I was just wondering, you mentioned Pat McKee and John Scofield, but who are some of your favorite guitar players from kind of like your generation or younger?
That's a good question. Nelson Barris, we have a new duo together actually. It's going to be doing a lot of stuff this year. He lives in Paris. He's kind of a hermit. He's a very interesting guy, but he's genius. Amazing. I put something up recently of we're doing a duo of Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. Check that out. Listen to that. Because it's cool to hear him over that. Because he can go pretty avant-garde. I mean, he sounds like, to me, he's like a cross of like, if you cross like Joe Beam, Schoenberg, and Alan Holdsworth. Like something like that. Because he's Brazilian, but he's crazy. And he's got like, he plays with this nylon string technique, with this crazy technique almost like this, sideways. You gotta check it out. Yeah, it's really amazing. So yeah, so we'll probably do a record this year because that's another example of two guys who like our backgrounds and the way we think is so different, but we're like brothers. We get along really well. It's like Abbott and Costello. But he's probably my favorite, just because of the sheer creativity and kind of, it's like a fear of cliches, you know, which is, I'm not that way, because I actually like a good cliche every once in a while, you know what I mean? But I like how committed he is to it, you know what I mean? It's funny, because even like the YouTube like comments, like, I knew that would happen. Like people, whenever they have two guys in the same instrument, they can't help like to start saying, "Well, I like this guy better." I like this guy better. So it's funny, and a lot of the comments are like that. They're like about that. They're like, Kreisberg's playing with all that, jazz blues feel, and here's Nelson on Outer Space. Then people are like, "Oh, yeah, but Kreisberg's and it's like me and Nelson just laugh when we see that shit because we love each other's playing and our own playing, so fuck it." But I think that's one of the beautiful things about jazz, when you get different personalities, you create such different music. When you hear these records where everyone sounds the same, it's really annoying. Yeah, he's probably my favorite. I think he's my favorite. Also Pete Bernstein, for a different reason. I mean, speaking of playing in the tradition, but just doing it with, might. Pete's just amazing. There's a record of his from like 2005 at Smalls with, and he's a little older than I am, but still, when he plays straight ahead jazz guitar, it's like, it sounds like so timeless, like it could have been from back with those guys, but it's as heavy, really, really heavy. So those are probably two of my favorites on very different ends of the spectrum.
So earlier you mentioned that you like Hindenburg.
Yeah.
You listen to a lot of them. So
Specifically, there's one piece of his that I listen to almost on a weekly basis. At one point, it was on a daily basis. It's the harp sonata, which, if you guys don't know that, especially, are you a guitar player?
no.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, it's amazing. But for guitar players, like this, it just sounds like the best guitar player who's ever lived. It's a harpist. There's one by Judy Lohman. She's a Canadian virtuoso harp. Everyone should hear that. It's like incredible, especially because he composes from his own place, which is it's not at all like the way we think of harmony. And the result is it sounds like this piece particularly sounds like timeless, but like it could be like pre-bop, but then at the same time it's like another planet, you know what I mean? It's almost like if music from that era, Baroque era, like went to another universe and then developed on its own for another 1,000 years. You know what I mean? It's like an alternate reality of music. Check it out. The Harp Sonata. No one's writing it down. Crazy. You are? Yeah, good. Extra credit, that's it. Seriously. Did you have a specific question?
I was just going to ask, like, I know it's kind of like hard to overtly quantify like somebody's influence in music, but at one point in your career you really start getting into this a lot, and then like, how did that manifest itself in your music?
No, I mean, if I was to look at my playing and influences and go into percentages, I mean, I never thought of doing that, and that's probably another thing I wouldn't want to do, but like, Bach would be really strongly in there, like maybe 40 or 50% or something. Because when I was a kid, I studied Bach, and then as an adult, I listened to it. I still take out the inventions sometimes and go through it a little bit. You know what I mean? I mean, speaking of counterpoint, I mean Bach is just ridiculous. You know? So that's a big one for me. Every once in a while, I'll even go through and just figure out like I went through. Did that. I did that whole thing. I did it by ear one day because I wanted to like experience Bach through reading it from the page. You know, so I was like, why not just like transcribe it? You know, not writing it down, but just play along with it. You know what I mean? It was really cool. You know what I mean? I learned more from that than probably transcribing guitar solo. You know what I mean? So I think that influence is really strong. Hindemith was later. I mean, I got into that like 5 years ago or something like that. So I wouldn't call that like a formative influence, but that's why I wouldn't want to quantify any of that stuff, you know. But I will say, like on that subject of listening to something a lot, I remember reading some kind of article with Train where he said that like when he was a kid he had like 5 sides, which I think means like 1 or 2 songs on each side or something. 1 song on each side.
One side of a 78.
Right. So he had like, that means 10 songs, right? That's what that means, right? So that's all he had, you know what I mean? And he said he could sing all the parts, like every solo on it, and every part of every instrument on there. So I found that, and I compared that to like today. You guys have like what, like 9 days of music on your iPod or something like that. You know what I mean? So I really, at that time, I already kind of did this a little bit, and then it really cemented that way of thinking, which is to really listen to something a lot, like if you like it, you know what I mean? Instead of being ADD and being like, oh, that's cool, what else is cool? You know what I mean? So I also started, I read that around the same time I got a car again, because in New York you don't always need a car, so I went like 15 years without a car. I got a car again like 8 years ago or something like that. And around that time was when that really hit me, because I was starting to amass more and more products on my computer or in my CD collection or whatever. So I started putting like 3 CDs in my car, and I would just leave them there, and every time I was driving I was listening to one of those, you know what I mean? So I actually listened to certain records like probably hundreds of times, you know what I mean? And I think you get more out of it that way. Even if you sit down and transcribe, it's even better, but also just listening to the same recording a lot, especially if it's, you know, a great one, like, you can't help having some osmosis that happens, you know what I mean? But I think if you listen ADD and you're just always looking for something new, it actually doesn't have the effect that you want, you know what I mean? So one of them was like Keith Jarrett, Fort Yahweh, you know that record? I mean, I listened to that record like 1,000,000 times. I have a great story about that actually, because we were in the car on a tour, and you know Tim Byrne, who's like, you know, pretty much avant-garde saxophonist, a great saxophonist, but definitely different than me. We're really different, you know, backgrounds or whatever. But I remember in the car, and he said, "Oh, that's what you're listening to or something at camp," and I said, "Man, I just been freaking out listening to Fort Yahweh, that Keith record." And he was like, I was at that show, because he's a lot older than me. He said, I was at that show. I was in the audience every night of this is Alive at the Vanguard, 1975 or something like that. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, somewhere around there. And he said I was in the audience every night of that recording. And he said the one of that gig, and he said the one that's on the album was the worst night. Which is crazy, because I mean, it's really good. Basically, you hear Keith like invent, like, it's like, you know, the Beatles album, like it invented like 5 different kinds of styles, right? Like the White Album has like invented like smart pop, like the Squeeze and stuff. It invented heavy metal with Helter Skelter. It invented progressive rock, like the end of Here Comes the Sun. Sounds like Yes and all those guys. They did all that on one record. Keith basically like defines contemporary piano for the next 40 years on that record. It's crazy. There's even like an intro that sounds basically like Meltdown, but Keith just did it, and then he was like, oh, that's cool, and then he moved on to something else. And like Brad was like, oh, I'm gonna take that and make a career out of it. It's like, I mean, Brad's a genius. He's amazing, but you can definitely hear that he checked that out. It's this one intro, actually, there's a couple of the intros that are just crazy. It's one of the one that he does where it's like, he's basically goes into a thing where his right hand is modulating through these beautiful like major third changes, and then the left hand is playing like atonal, like symmetrical patterns. You know that one? Where it's like his mind's clearly like gone 2 different places. It's just going. What?
Who's the guitar?
Keith Jarrett.
Oh, Keith Jarrett.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then there's like this weird drugged out percussionist who's like hitting like a triangle in the middle of it. And I want to jump in the speakers and strangle him. Because it's like he's doing like the most amazing thing you've ever heard in your life, and he's like, ding. So there's some comedy mixed in there. But yeah, that record's amazing. There's also another tune on there where they do that. They do like a form with changes, and it's all being led, I guess, by Keith, but like it couldn't be possible without anyone besides Charlie Hayden and Paul Motion, the way they play together. Because it's like, it's timeless kind of, but it's in time. It's like in time, but the changes change wherever they're feeling it. It's really good, really good. Check that out.
You talk a lot about playing with people with like wildly different styles and kind of finding that common ground and pushing each other to like try different things.
Yeah, wildly different styles, but with some threads that connect them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important.
Have
Because
you
he's not
ever,
going to go and play with like a funk polka guy from like.
I was gonna ask, have you ever played with someone that you just clash with in a way that you can't get past?
Oh yeah.
He will this afternoon. I said this afternoon.
No, that's definitely happened. Yeah, yeah. Especially with someone with a very strong personality. But I've also had weird stuff happen where I think that's happening, and then I hear the recording later, and I'm like, that's actually pretty good. You know what I mean? There's some guys that I've played with a bit that are like that. But every time I play with them, I have to kind of, okay, relax, let it happen. You know what I mean? Because it's like their personality is like certain, you know, like gets in there, and then at first it's very uncomfortable. You know what I mean? And then you kind of listen back, and you're like, actually, it's cool. It made me kind of do some things that I wouldn't normally do. You know what I mean?
Well, on that, like, do you ever have that, like, where when you're playing, you think it isn't feeling right, and then you listen to it, it feels good, or vice versa, and that happens to me all the time, and I don't know.
Yeah, it happens to me maybe less than it used to.
Yeah.
But
I think it's getting outside your own head when you're playing and trying to listen to it holistically. Because I know I'm having a bad day.
yeah, but the
I'm
opposite
getting-
happens too. Like where I think,
Yeah.
man, I was killing it.
Yeah.
Because time is funny like that. You know, especially like, you know, that's why there's a lot of records from the '70s where like there's some of them are like really creative and there's really cool stuff, but the time feels like horrible. You know what I mean? Because there was a lot of cocaine and you know different issues that made people kind of like think, yeah, this is awesome, and then you listen back and you're like, whoa. You know, depending on the music, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, heavy metal bebop is pretty awesome. Because, you know, if you guys know that record, that's Michael Brecker, the Brecker Brothers, with Terry Bozzio, speaking of Terry Bozzio on drums. That is so coked out. It's so good. It's so good because it's that kind of music. It's like fusion. Like Mike Brecker is playing with a wah pedal. Like this, it sounds like Eddie Van Halen meets like Coltrane. It's like, I mean, I used to love that record. I still do. But you know, that kind of thing, when it happens in the wrong context, can be bad. You know what I mean? Like maybe you're playing on something that's like a deep swing thing, and you're like, at the time you're like, yeah, this is awesome. You know, then you listen back and you're like, whoa, I sound like I'm really on top and like, you know, nervous or something. You know, it can sound. So the way you experience music isn't always the way it sounds. Right? I guess that's the subject. Learning how to maybe be a little more conscious of that without losing the inspiration is probably a good challenge.
You said something really good about learning from it, because I find
Yeah.
that I too often, if I get in a situation like that, I keep focusing at the other guy. Why do you keep doing that? Why do you keep doing that? Maybe it should be, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Oh, you mean
And
back
be
to
able
her question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To back off and say, maybe I'm the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to learn on this one.
Yeah, exactly. And then sometimes you want to say, okay, well, let's make this sound great, and I'll never play this guy again. That's okay too. You know what I mean? Specifically, time field stuff can be an issue for you. If someone drags, like a rhythm section drags, or a certain combination of bass and drums, like I have some bass players I can't use with my drummer. You know what I mean? Like because he's one of those guys who maybe will go with the guy, and if I'm playing with a band that drags, it's rough. I kind of will avoid that situation because it really makes me feel bad. I'll finish, my neck will hurt, like a donkey pulling a cart.
Because you're trying to push it forward.
Yeah. It's weird how it manifests physically, like you actually feel like you pulled something, you know. So that's a hard one. But more like, musical personalities is a different subject, you know what I mean?
I mean, like as a bass player, like as a drummer, some drummers like to play light and loose. And I'm trying to push and I'm trying to grab onto something to hang on to.
Right.
And the drummer's a fabulous drummer, but it's just, I've got to rethink what I'm doing.
Yeah, and even that, like, when it's light and loose, it's like, for me, the guys that do that well, they know that it's even more important what they put, where they place everything. That's why DeJohnette is so amazing. He's a perfect example. Someone who's like his inner clock is so strong and everything, he just barely plays anything, but like when he does it, it's like, you know, it's in exactly the right place. That's really important. But those, you know, sometimes there's guys that do that and it's like, the time's actually loosey too, you know. And I just want to sit them down with like a Mod Jamal trio and be like, check that out. You know? Yeah.
Do you ever deal with any repetitive stress from a lot of playing, or do you?
I did.
Do you
when I
do
was
it?
younger. Yeah, both wrists, different times.
Any suggestions on ways
Sleep
to
more.
prevent it?
that was. I know it seems like a joke, but it's true actually. Your body repairs itself a lot. I used to sleep like 4 or 5 hours a night, practicing like crazy hours. Yeah, it's just your body has to rebuild itself. You know? So sleeping is more relaxing. Really, when you get you know, when you're young, you think you can push through anything. You know what I mean? And it's like the immovable object thing. You know? I've actually hurt myself doing that, like trying to push an immovable object. And I realized that was kind of like, first of all, it's a personality issue of mine, like not taking no for an answer, you know what I mean? But I realized that it exists. You can't deny that. At some point, you're going to try and push something that will not move, you know? And the same thing applies to your playing. There's going to be a certain thing you're trying to do that it's just not going to change, you know? So you have to kind of look at your technique and figure out a different way to achieve that. Basically, you should be able to achieve anything relaxed. You know what I mean? It shouldn't take, you know, physical strength to achieve something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I think I used to, my right hand used to do some things. My left hand was trying to do some things that were, and I just kept pushing and pushing, and I hurt myself. That being said, the left hand one, when that happened, it was right, I think it was just out of college, and I didn't play guitar for a month. And I think it was one of the best things that ever happened to me because I just sat at the piano with my right hand, plucking notes and singing things and seeing what I heard in my head, and in a way that I hadn't done when I was busy playing all this shit. You know what I mean? So you look at every situation and try and use it to grow. You know?
Got just a couple of minutes left. Do you want to play something? Take another question?
We'll take another question.
Okay.
They're gonna come to the gig, right? You guys coming to the gig tonight? Playing tonight.
Yeah, when you talk about Terry Bozzio and stuff, like, how do you feel about the line of technology and, like, I mean, he's the biggest kid in the world and it's super big, I think.
Huge, right?
Like, where do you see the line of, like, oh yeah, he's creative enough or good enough to use all that, or is it just overkill, or, you know, how many pedals, we're gonna use a looping pedal, is that
Are you a
cheating?
drummer?
I'm a drummer, yeah, so, I mean, see this.
Honestly, I'm not that familiar with what he's been doing musically for the past long time.
There's the idea of like,
I love
I've
him
got
on
so many
Zappa, and I
songs.
love him with missing persons, and even like something I heard with the Steve Vai at one point, which was pretty awesome too. You know, for the little kid in me, you know, it's fun, it's crazy stuff. But I don't know. I have to check that out.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds excessive. I know it's huge. Right? It's like as big as this room. The drum set. How does he even reach everything?
Well, he's got a bunch of toms that are all tuned to different.
All around him.
Yeah, basically tuned to like just a piano, you know,
Yeah.
and then he's got just China cymbals
I'd
everywhere.
I'd have to hear it, man. It might be amazing. I mean, have you checked it out?
Yeah,
What do you think of it?
I think that it's pretty cool, but a little too heady, I guess. And but you were saying that that's the kind of question I was asking: is where do you draw the line of it being too heady or being too
Listen,
reliant on
As
technology?
long as it's cool. I mean,
Yeah.
as long as it sounds good. You know, maybe we'd do something like that, and it would be like completely amazing.
Yeah.
I'd have to hear it. I maybe would like to hear him do something like that, but like composed by like an amazing composer. You know what I mean? And hear him perform it because he was always good at that stuff. He played the Black Page and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he's a great sight reader and all that stuff. So I kind of would be curious, like in the hands of a great composer, what he could do with that. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I don't know if anyone's done that for him. You know,
Sure.
but maybe someone who's composed like great vibraphone music could like write something for that with the 12 notes or something. Maybe that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Sounds interesting, but I haven't listened to it at all.
Mhm.
I think I've seen some things and I was like, wow, that looks ridiculous, you know, but maybe it's cool, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's like Matheny's Orchestrion, you know, that's like a really excessive, strange thing, you know? So, but there's moments of that that's really amazing.
Mhm.
But yeah, technology versus what?
Mixed musicality or like
Yeah.
pure.
Yeah, well, the question is, yeah, are they against each other? Pure, simple musicality. Yeah, maybe you have to watch out for that balance sometimes. I've
Yes.
definitely gone through periods of my life where I got conscious of the fact that I was maybe, I still write most of my charts by hand. So, I mean, I used a sequencer for some of my tunes,
Yeah.
and they came out kind of different. I think ultimately I realized that like I wanted to be careful for that, you know, because when I get something like that, I'm like, oh, I can do this, you know, and it gets kind of out of hand. You know what I mean? So I think it's just all what you do with it. It's back to the tools thing, the muse.
Yeah.
You know, it's like what do you do with it? You know, technology should always be a tool, not a distraction or not a diversion. You know what I mean? From the stuff you hear in your head.
What's the appropriate number of mutes a trumpet player should have?
Every trumpet player should have
Eric.
only 2 mutes. No, I mean, honestly, I think if a trumpet player like practices the right stuff, then they should be stuffing all kinds of things in their trumpet and try and, you know, see what it sounds like with a sock stuck in it, you know, or a small puppy, you know. You know, I mean, why not, you know, if it's the music that keeps moving, you know. But that is technically the fear that I had personally at that moment when I said I moved to New York, where I stopped using piano, was that I noticed that I was getting overly because music really is 4 elements. I mean, right? They always teach 3, but it's really 4, right? You have melody, harmony, rhythm, texture. You can't leave texture out. I don't think, you know, unless every music was played on one monophonic instrument that was and never changed tone, then that wouldn't be an element. But I mean, come on, it's a huge element of music. In fact, pop music basically has become just that. And that's what I saw that I was worried about. I was like, maybe that's an issue, you know, if like melody doesn't even matter and harmony doesn't matter because you're combining this sound with this sound, you know, you gotta watch out for it. So for me, it was about scaling back and remembering like there's still so much innovation that can happen with melody and harmony and rhythm, you know what I mean, without the texture sheet, you know what I mean? And you can see in history, there's examples of guys that really focused in that way, like Tristano, that's another huge influence for me, is Tristano was big on that. I mean, he kind of he took rhythm basically. I mean, he did some, actually, he was really ahead of his time. He did some stuff in 5 and 7, like way before Brubeck did. So, I mean, he also played free jazz 10 years before Cornette did. So, he was really ahead of his time. I mean, but he also worked on like focusing. So, like, a lot of his compositions are actually so that you can focus purely on the rhythm within the line. You know what I mean? Whereas if the band's interacting and everyone's doing that, it takes away a little bit. You know, he was trying to achieve something. So the line, the melodies, which in his case were more dense lines, was maximized by minimizing what else was going on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, it would kind of be like that. Like if we just took away samples and all kinds of textures and auto-tune, and then like had an actual musician make pop music again, it would probably be really good. You know, so that might happen. We'll see. You know, I don't know. There's some promising people out there. So I think we're cool, right?
That's it, yeah.
You guys have fun? Yeah. So